Hey everybody, we're going to be looking at Reconstruction. So let's first look at the essay prompt, and then we'll move on to the first learning objective. So the essay prompt is to discuss the two constitutional theories that evolved around the question of Reconstruction and identify the three phases of Reconstruction, which were presidential Reconstruction, congressional Reconstruction, and redemption. And then show how congressional Reconstruction was a reaction to presidential construction. And then finally describe the Compromise of 1877 and its effects on reestablishing white supremacy in the United States. So a little background before we get into the first learning objective. Reconstruction, it's from 1863 to 1877, as posted right here. And it is just the process that developed following the Civil War, reconstructing physically the South from the destruction of the war. And then there was an attempt, and this is mainly what we're going to be looking at this lecture, there was an attempt to reconcile racial differences, that is, to create a biracial, equitable society in the South. This was mainly the charge of congressional Reconstruction. We'll look at that more in detail. So following this, here's basically the map of the Civil War right here. So following the Civil War was divided up the country into basically two parts. You had the United States of America, as seen up here in blue, in light blue, and then denoted on this pink border line right here, you have the Confederate States of America, which was the seceded states from the Union. Now, a big part of three individuals that we want to be keenly aware of when we're looking at Reconstruction is, of course, Abraham Lincoln, the president during the Civil War and for the first part of Reconstruction until he's assassinated. His vice president, Andrew Johnson. And then some of their one of their chief rivals in Congress, a gentleman named Thaddeus Stevens, who would represent, along with Charles Sumner, the faction of what are known as radical Republicans. And radical Republicans truly, for the most part, believed that in order for this country to transcend its problems from the Civil War, African Americans were going to have to be brought out of second-class citizenship into full citizenship status. And so what we'll see is a huge conflict between the president, the executive, and Congress. At first between Lincoln and Thaddeus Stevens, and then most poignantly between Andrew Johnson and Thaddeus Stevens. So with that said, looking at the first learning objective, we want to look at the two constitutional theories that are revolved around the question of Reconstruction. So the Reconstruction had been the subject of discussion in the North since the beginning of the war, basically what to do with the South once this war is won. And as usual, the discussion took place on the plane of constitutional theory. So the constitutional controversy centered on 2 points. The first, were the states in or out of the Union when the rebellion was crushed? And the second question would be, who would control the Reconstruction process? The president, the executive branch, or Congress, the legislative branch? So again, these are basically the two questions that revolved around constitutional theories here, right? Were the seceded states in or out of the Union when the rebellion was crushed? And the second question, who should control the Reconstruction process? The president or Congress? So for this learning objective, we're mainly going to look at the first question right here. And then the second learning objective, we'll get into the details of this question of who's going to control Reconstruction, the Reconstruction process. So for many in the North, the premise was that secession was illegal. So strict logic of that, the idea that it was illegal, reached the conclusion that the former states of the Confederacy, the former Confederate States of America, had always been and were now states of the Union, with all the rights and privileges pertaining, right? So both President Johnson and Lincoln, first Lincoln, then Johnson, supported this view. They saw the states as indestructible, and they were never out of the Union for the very simple reasons that they could not be out of the Union. So this theory, though vigorously opposed by radical leaders like Thaddeus Stevens, received judicial support in the Supreme Court case of Texas versus White in 1869, when Chief Justice Chase, speaking of the majority, stated the following: "The Constitution, in all of its provisions, looks to an indestructible union composed of indestructible states. Considered, therefore, as transactions under the Constitution, the ordinance of secession, and all the acts of her legislative intended to give effect to that ordinance were absolutely null." In other words, secession could not have happened, right? "They were utterly without operation in law. The obligations of the state as a member of the Union remained perfect and unimpaired. It certainly follows that the state did not cease to be a state," speaking of Texas, "nor her citizens to be citizens of the Union," right? So Texas, when it seceded from the Union, everyone living there, even though Texas claimed to be part of a new country called Confederate States of America, according to Justice Chase, those people remain citizens of the United States. If this were otherwise, the states must have become foreign, and her citizens foreigners. The war must have ceased to be a war for the suppression of rebellion, and must have become a war for conquest and subjugation. Our conclusion, therefore, is that Texas continued to be a state and a state of the Union. So if, on the contrary to what Chase had decided, the South might consistently be treated as a conquered territory and without any legal rights that the Union was required to respect. And this is what Lincoln was terribly worried about, because it's typical after a civil war for the victor to take a pound of flesh because they're pissed off, right? Because they fought this nasty civil war. Lincoln wants to avoid that, because when that phenomena happens, what tends to happen is the losing side regroups sometime down the future, and another civil war occurs, or just a continuation of the Civil War occurs after some sort of stalling process, because this pound of flesh was taken, because they were treated as a conquered territory. Lincoln's trying to avoid that. So on the other hand, radical Republicans led by Thaddeus Stevens, let's bring his picture up again. This guy right here, managed to prove to their satisfaction that southern states had lost or forfeited their rights, and therefore could be treated as conquered states. So because they're having these conversely and diametrically opposing views of what the Civil War meant and what it meant now that the South had lost, the question, this is going to lead to the second question: who's going to control the process of Reconstruction? The executive or Congress? Obviously, the president is going to feel as commander-in-chief. He's going to fulfill that promise, and the legislature, since legislatures like Thaddeus Stevens believe that the president is wrong, they're going to try to take over this process. And this is going to become a huge constitutional crisis that will really define the successes and the failures of Reconstruction. So we will touch on this kind of power grab in Learning Objective 2, that who's going to try to control it. We'll first look at presidential Reconstruction, and then we'll get to congressional Reconstruction. So see you there. Let me know if you have any questions about any of this content. Don't ever hesitate to ask. It's okay to be confused, just don't stay confused. So talk to you guys later.